The phone rang at 2:14 p.m. "It's stage 3 breast cancer, Elena. It's aggressive," Dr. Aris said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "We start chemo Monday morning." My world didn't just blur, it shattered. I hung up and immediately dialed Julian, my hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I needed my husband. I needed the man who promised in sickness and in health to tell me we would fight this together. But when he picked up, I heard the clinking of champagne glasses and loud, boisterous laughter. "Julian," I sobbed, "the doctor called. It's stage 3 breast cancer. I have to start chemo on Monday. Please, come home." There was a long, icy pause. I expected a gasp or a cry. Instead, Julian's voice came through like a blade. "Elena, I'm at the firm's anniversary gala. Do you have any idea how bad it looks for me to be on the phone right now? You're being incredibly dramatic and selfish. Can't you just deal with this later? You're ruining my night." The line went dead. I sat in Julian's architectural office, where I worked as his firm's financial controller, surrounded by his blueprints that suddenly looked like gibberish. My knuckles were white against the mahogany desk, and the air felt too thin to breathe. He hadn't asked if I was okay. He hadn't asked what the survival rate was. He had only asked if I could deal with it later, so I wouldn't ruin his party. I realize now that was the exact moment the woman he married died, not from the cancer, but from the realization that I was married to a man who saw my life and death struggle as a mere inconvenience to his social calendar. I stayed at that desk for hours, watching the city lights flicker on, while I felt the cold shadow of the medical winter begin to settle in my bones. When I finally dragged myself home, the house was dark and felt like a tomb. Julian didn't stumble through the door until 3 a.m., smelling of expensive bourbon and stale cigar tobacco. I was still at the kitchen table, the light from the refrigerator the only thing cutting through the darkness. He didn't even look at me. He just tossed his designer blazer onto a chair. "I hope you've finally calmed down," he said, unbuttoning his silk shirt with practiced indifference. "I have the biggest contract of my career starting next week. I need absolute focus, Elena. I need a wife who supports my trajectory, not one who brings home a dark cloud of sickness. If you're going to be doing this chemo stuff, you need to do it quietly. I can't have the neighbors or my partners seeing you looking like a ghost. It's bad for my image and bad for business." A sharp, jagged spark of anger ignited in my chest, burning through the numbness. He wasn't worried about my survival. He was worried about the aesthetics of having a broken wife. I looked at his reflection in the darkened window and realized I wasn't a partner to him. I was a luxury accessory that had suddenly become defective. He wanted me to be quiet? Fine, I would be silent. But I was a professional financial controller with deep knowledge of high-end accounting, and I still had my maiden name, Elena Sterling, which meant something in the financial world. If I was going to fight for my life, I was going to make sure that by the time I was finished, he didn't have a life or a career left to come home to. Monday morning arrived with a cruel, mocking sun that poured through the bedroom windows. I waited in the foyer, my small overnight bag packed with a fleece blanket, a bottle of water, and a book I knew I wouldn't be able to read. Julian came down the stairs, whistling a tune and straightening his silk tie in the hallway mirror. He looked perfect, not a single hair out of place, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection. "Are you ready to go?" I asked, my voice small but hopeful. He looked at me through the reflection of the glass, his eyes cold, distant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Go where, Elena? I told you, the new high-rise project kicks off today. I have a board meeting in exactly 40 minutes. Take an Uber, or call that sister of yours if you really need someone. I just can't deal with the hospital environment right now. All those sick people, the smell of bleach, it's depressing. It drains my creative energy and ruins my headspace." He walked right past me, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the air like a physical slap in the face. I stood there, frozen, as the front door clicked shut with a finality that echoed through the empty house. I felt like a discarded toy, something to be played with only when it was fun. I dialed for a car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely type the hospital's address into the app. On the ride to the oncology clinic, I stared out the window at the passing trees and made a silent, ironclad vow to myself. If I survived this, if I fought this monster and won, I would never, ever let this man see a single tear of mine again. He wanted me to be quiet about my illness? Fine, I would be silent. But my silence would eventually become the loudest thing he had ever heard. The infusion center was a vast sea of blue vinyl recliners and the constant, rhythmic hum of medical machines. A nurse named Maria, whose eyes were filled with a kindness I hadn't seen in days, led me to my assigned seat. "Where is your support person, dear?" she asked gently, her gaze lingering on my wedding ring. I felt the familiar hot sting of tears in my eyes, but I forced them back with everything I had left. "He's an architect," I said, the lie tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. "He's building something very important. He couldn't get away from the site." Maria patted my hand, her eyes filled with a deep pity that hurt more than the needle she was about to insert. As the clear, toxic liquid began to drip slowly into my vein, I felt a strange, icy sensation crawling up my arm. It was the poison that was supposed to save my life. I sat there for 6 grueling hours, watching the clock on the wall tick away the seconds of my youth. I watched a man in the recliner next to me being fed grapes by his devoted wife. I watched a young girl being held tightly by her mother, both of them crying softly. I was the only person in the entire ward who was completely alone. Every single time the automatic doors slid open, a small, pathetic part of me hoped it would be Julian walking in with an apology, a hug, and a bouquet of flowers. But the door only opened for busy nurses and more exhausted patients. By the time the IV bag was finally empty, I felt hollowed out and frail, but deep inside, my mind was beginning to sharpen into a weapon. When I finally returned home after that first session, I was exhausted, shivering, and violently nauseous. I walked into the living room to find Julian sitting with 3 of his younger colleagues. They were sprawled out, surrounded by rolls of blueprints and at least 5 empty pizza boxes. The heavy smell of pepperoni and grease made my stomach turn over in a sickening knot. "Oh, you're back," Julian said, barely glancing up from a structural diagram. "Could you be a doll and clear some of these boxes? We're in the middle of a major breakthrough on the foundation levels." I stood there, leaning heavily against the doorframe, just to keep from collapsing. My skin was a sickly shade of pale, and the room was tilting on its axis. One of the men, a junior designer named Toby, looked at me with genuine concern. "Are you okay, Mrs. Vance? You look a bit faint. Should I help you to a chair?" Before I could even open my mouth to thank him, Julian let out a dismissive chuckle. "She's just having a mood, Toby. Don't mind her. She likes the attention. Elena, the kitchen is a total mess too. If you're going to be home all day resting, the least you can do is keep the place tidy for when I have guests." I didn't say a single word in response. I turned around, gripped the railing, and hauled myself up the stairs to the guest bedroom. I locked the door and slid down to the floor. That was the night I realized that Julian didn't just lack empathy. He was actively enjoying the absolute power he had over me while I was at my weakest. He wasn't just a bad husband, he was a predator. The medical winter truly set in over the following weeks. My life became a grueling, repetitive cycle of nausea, bone-deep exhaustion, and the constant metallic taste of chemotherapy drugs. Julian became a ghost in my own house, a shadow that only appeared to criticize or complain. He stopped sleeping in our master bedroom entirely, claiming that my restless, sickly energy was keeping him from dreaming about his high-rise designs. He stopped eating dinner with me, and he even started a separate bank account, telling me that we needed to protect our long-term assets in case my medical bills got out of hand. I was surviving on plain crackers and ginger ale, driving myself to appointment after appointment in a daze. One afternoon, while I was trying to find a clean pillowcase in the guest room, I found a crumpled receipt in the pocket of Julian's discarded wool coat. It was for a custom diamond pendant, $15,000. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I checked our joint medical savings account, the one we had built specifically for emergencies. It was nearly empty, and I realized this wasn't the first withdrawal he'd made. He hadn't bought a gift for me to cheer me up. He had drained our survival fund to buy jewelry for someone else, while I was literally losing my hair. But as the firm's financial controller, I had access to the business accounts, and I discovered something even worse. He was using embezzled business funds to replenish what he'd stolen from our medical savings, thinking I was too sick to notice. He was literally stealing from his partners to cover up stealing from his dying wife. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream or throw plates. Instead, I went to the stationery store and bought a thick, black, leather-bound notebook. On the very first page, in bold, shaky letters, I wrote, "The Ledger of Abandonment." I began to document every single detail of his betrayal with the precision I'd learned in my accounting career. I saved every Uber receipt from my lonely trips to the oncology ward. I secretly printed out the digital visitor logs from the hospital department that showed a big fat 0 next to family support visitors for every single session. I even used my phone to record the audio of Julian telling me that my cancer breath was disgusting and that I should stay in the guest room when he had important people over. But I didn't just record his cruelty. I started planning my tactical escape. Working as his firm's financial controller gave me access to everything, and I knew exactly where to look for what I suspected I'd find. While Julian was out at glitzy gala events or late-night site visits, I sat at my laptop with a cold compress on my head, digging deep into his firm's private financial records. I found exactly what my gut told me I would. He was systematically overbilling clients and funneling the extra cash into a private offshore account. He was stealing from his own business partners, just like he was stealing the life force from his wife. I meticulously copied every fraudulent file, every double-entry invoice, and every shady email. I put them all into a hidden digital folder titled The Project. If I was going to lose my life to this disease, I was going to make sure he didn't have a golden throne to sit on after I was gone. My hair started falling out in large, terrifying clumps during the second month of treatment. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, watching the woman I used to be slowly disappear into a stranger. I didn't wait for the patches to get worse. I took a pair of heavy-duty shears and shaved it all off until my scalp was smooth and bare. When Julian saw me that evening, he actually recoiled in visible disgust. "My God, Elena, you look like a prisoner of war or something. It's jarring. Can't you at least wear a high-quality wig? My parents are coming over for a formal dinner this Sunday, and I won't have you embarrassing me in front of them looking like a terminal patient." I looked at him, my head feeling smooth and strangely cold. "Your parents are coming?" I asked quietly, my voice devoid of emotion. "They haven't called me or sent a card once since I got the diagnosis." Julian shrugged indifferently, checking his gold watch. "I told them you were just having some female health issues and needed some space to decompress. I didn't want to ruin their expensive Mediterranean vacation with the C word. It's too heavy. Just put on a stylish hat and act normal for 4 hours. Is that too much to ask?" That Sunday, I sat at the mahogany table while his parents droned on about their luxury cruise to Greece. I wore a heavy silk scarf wrapped tightly around my head. Every single time I tried to speak or share a thought, Julian would interrupt me, talk over me, or steer the conversation back to his latest architectural genius. I felt like a ghost sitting at my own dinner table, invisible and unheard. I realized then that they didn't see me because Julian had already systematically erased my existence from their lives. The third month of chemotherapy was the hardest, most grueling period of my life. The drugs were cumulative, and my body was finally starting to shatter under the weight of the toxicity. I ended up spending 3 terrifying days in the hospital with a high fever that the doctors couldn't seem to break. During those 72 hours, I called Julian 42 times from my hospital bed. He never picked up a single call. He never even sent a text to check if I was still breathing. When I was finally discharged, weak and trembling, I had to walk to the hospital curb and wait for a taxi in the freezing rain because he claimed he was in a dead zone for a client meeting. When I finally dragged myself home, the house was filled with the cloying, sweet smell of expensive perfume, a scent that definitely wasn't mine. I found a delicate silk scarf tucked into the corner of the sofa, a brand I didn't own, along with a lipstick that wasn't my shade rolled under the coffee table. Julian was upstairs, loudly singing in the shower, as if he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. I just felt a cold, dead weight in my chest. I went straight to my guest room, opened my black ledger, and added a new entry. October 14th. Spent 72 hours in the ICU alone. Julian was at a site visit with his junior assistant, Sophia. Found her scarf and lipstick in our living room today. He didn't ask if I survived the night. My recovery from that point on was fueled by a sharp clinical spite. I wasn't just fighting for my physical health anymore. I was fighting to live long enough to watch his world burn. I started secretly selling some of the expensive jewelry and designer items I'd owned since before our marriage, pieces my grandmother had left me, and things I'd bought with my own pre-marriage salary. Every cent went into a private account Julian didn't even know existed, one under my maiden name, Elena Sterling. 1 year after that devastating 2:14 p.m. phone call, the miracle I had stopped praying for finally happened. I was sitting in Dr. Aris's office, my breath hitched in my throat and my heart hammering against my ribs. He looked at the latest scans, then looked at me and let out a wide, genuine smile. "Remission, Elena. You're clear. The breast cancer markers are gone." I didn't cry. I didn't scream with joy. I just sat there and nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of clinical satisfaction. I felt like a soldier who had finally climbed out of a muddy trench after a year of war. I went home and, for the first time in an entire year, I cooked a real, multi-course meal for myself. When Julian came home, he looked genuinely annoyed to see the kitchen in use and the smell of food in the air. "Oh, you're feeling better? I guess the drama is over then," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Good, because the firm is having a massive launch party for the high-rise next month, and I need you to play the part of the supportive, elegant wife. No more scarves, no more moping about being tired. Just look pretty, wear something expensive, and stay in the background where you belong." I looked at him and offered a small, dangerous smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course, Julian. I'll be exactly what you need me to be for that party." I didn't tell him I was healthy. I didn't tell him the cancer was gone. I wanted him to keep thinking I was weak and dependent. I wanted him to stay arrogant and overconfident. Because an arrogant man is a careless man, and a careless man is easy to destroy. The next 6 months were a blur of intense, secret activity that Julian never suspected. While he thought I was napping or resting my weak heart, I was actually taking secret meetings with a high-profile divorce attorney and a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate fraud. I handed over the project digital folder, containing all the evidence I had spent a year gathering, including photos of Sophia's belongings in our home and records of Julian's business trips that coincided with her vacation days. My lawyer's eyes widened as she scrolled through the sheer volume of Julian's financial crimes and personal betrayals. "This isn't just a divorce, Elena," she said, her voice hushed with awe. "This is a massive criminal case. You've basically handed the SEC a silver platter, and the adultery evidence seals his fate in the divorce proceedings." I told her to wait on filing. I wanted the timing to be absolutely perfect for the maximum impact. I continued to play the role of the frail, recovering wife at home. I even bought a wig that looked slightly unkempt and applied makeup to make my skin look paler than it actually was to keep up the charade. Meanwhile, I was secretly working out, eating high-protein meals, and regaining my physical strength. I felt like a deep-cover spy in my own house. Julian began to treat me like a piece of office equipment that was finally back in working order, but still needed frequent maintenance. He started allowing me to handle his personal errands and filing again, which gave me even deeper access to his private records. He had absolutely no idea that every single time I touched his laptop, I was digging his professional grave deeper and deeper. I finally moved out of the house on a Tuesday morning while Julian was away in Dubai for what he called a critical business trip with Sophia, his junior assistant. I didn't take much with me, just my clothes, my black ledger, and the mountain of legal documents I had prepared. I left a short, clinical note on the master bed. "I've decided to go stay with my sister for a while. I need some quiet space to focus on my recovery, just like you suggested during my treatment." I immediately changed my phone number and moved into a small, highly secure apartment downtown that I had rented under my maiden name. Elena Sterling. I spent the next several months building a completely new life from the ground up. I secured a position at a different high-end accounting firm, reclaiming my career and my dignity. I grew my hair out into a chic, modern bob that made me look younger and stronger than I had in years. I felt like I had been born again, rising from the ashes of my old life. I watched Julian from a safe distance through the local business news and architectural journals. His big project was starting to crumble under its own weight. There were rumors of massive structural integrity issues and lawsuits from angry investors. The firm's partners were finally starting to ask where the millions of dollars in overages had gone. I knew it was only a matter of time before the foundation gave way. I felt like a hunter, sitting patiently in the tall grass, watching my prey wander closer to the trap. 2 years to the very day after my stage 3 diagnosis, the hammer finally dropped. My lawyer called me at my new office, her voice buzzing with excitement. "The authorities moved in this morning, Elena. It was a coordinated raid. Julian has been stripped of his architectural license, effective immediately, and every single one of his personal and professional assets has been frozen by the court. His partners are suing him for every cent he has, and the criminal charges for fraud are being processed as we speak. Oh, and Sophia? She's been fired and is facing charges as an accomplice." I sat on my new balcony, looking out at the sprawling city skyline, and felt a profound, deep-seated sense of peace wash over me. But I knew the story wasn't over yet. A week later, I got a call from an unknown, unlisted number. My gut told me not to answer, but curiosity won out. It was Julian. His once boisterous voice was now cracked, weak, and trembling. "Elena, please. I know I messed everything up. I was under so much pressure, but I'm sick, Elena. My heart. The doctor says the stress of the lawsuits has caused a serious condition. I have no money left for treatment. They're threatening to foreclose on the house next month. I have no one left. My parents won't even take my calls anymore. Sophia disappeared the second the accounts were frozen. Please, I'm begging you. I need you to come back. We can fix this together. You're the only person who ever truly cared about me." I listened to him sob into the phone. The same man who told me I was ruining his night while I was dying. The irony was almost too much to bear. "I'll come over one last time, Julian," I said, my voice as flat and emotionless as a dial tone. "We can talk." I drove over to our old house, the place that used to be my sanctuary. It looked horribly neglected now. The lawn was overgrown with weeds, the flower beds I had tended were dead, and the windows were caked with dirt. Julian opened the door, and I almost didn't recognize the man standing before me. He was painfully thin, his clothes were disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot from days of crying. He reached out to try and hug me, but I stepped back with a look of visible revulsion. "Inside, Julian," I said firmly. We sat in the grand living room where he had once hosted lavish parties, while I suffered in silence in the guest room. He started a long, rambling, pathetic speech about how he had finally realized his mistakes, and how the shock of my illness had scared him into acting poorly because he loved me too much to see me sick. He actually had the audacity to ask me to move back in and use my new salary to help him pay for his expensive heart medication and legal defense. He told me it was my sacred duty as his wife to forgive him and stand by him in his hour of need. He even claimed that Sophia had seduced and manipulated him during his vulnerable time. I sat there and let him talk until his voice finally gave out from the sheer effort of lying. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick, black leather ledger, placing it firmly on the coffee table between us. "Do you remember this, Julian? You saw me writing in it for months." He looked at the book, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it? A diary? A scrapbook of our memories?" I opened it to the very first page and began to flip through it slowly. I showed him the stack of Uber receipts from my lonely hospital trips. I showed him the visitor logs with the zeros next to his name. I played the recording of him calling my breath disgusting while I was reeling from the chemo. I showed him the high-resolution photos I had taken of the empty chair in the oncology ward. I showed him the photos of Sophia's belongings in our home and the evidence of their Dubai trip together. His face went from a sickly pale to a ghostly, translucent white. "I didn't just survive cancer, Julian," I said, standing up and towering over him. I survived you, and while you were busy stealing from your partners to replace the money you stole from our medical fund to buy jewelry for your assistant, and while you were abandoning your dying wife, I was busy documenting your downfall. He began to shake violently, his teeth practically chattering. Elena, please. I'm a sick man. You can't just leave a sick man alone in a house like this. It's heartless. It's cruel. What am I supposed to do now? I walked slowly to the front door and pulled it wide open, letting the freezing winter air rush into the foyer. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling the full, glorious weight of my victory. I used the exact 4 words he had used on me 2 years ago when I needed him most. I can't deal with this right now. I walked out of that house, and I never once looked back. As I drove away down the familiar street, I saw Julian's silhouette standing in the doorway in my rearview mirror, a small, broken, and pathetic figure in a house that would soon no longer be his. He was left with exactly what he had given me when I was at death's door. Absolutely nothing. No support system, no love, no financial safety net, and no hope. I went back to my beautiful, quiet apartment and poured myself a glass of aged wine. My life was finally mine again. The ledger was closed for good. I had fought the monster that was growing inside my body, and I had fought the monster that was sleeping in my bed, and against all odds, I had won both wars. The medical winter was finally, officially over, and for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely looking forward to the spring. I realized that the best revenge in the world wasn't just seeing him lose his status and his money. It was the quiet, profound joy of seeing myself win. I was healthy, I was strong, and I was finally truly free from the shadow of a man who never deserved me. The next few months were a whirlwind of complex legal proceedings and depositions. Since I had provided the project folder, the smoking gun evidence that brought Julian's entire fraudulent empire down, the court was incredibly favorable toward me during the divorce settlement. I was awarded a very significant portion of the remaining assets that hadn't been seized by the government, which was more than enough for me to quit my job and start my own independent bookkeeping and consulting firm. Julian's health reportedly continued to decline, but I made sure to stay far, far away. I heard through the professional grapevine that he was eventually moved into a small, state-funded studio apartment in a rough part of town after the house was foreclosed. Sophia had predictably disappeared the very second his bank accounts were frozen by the feds. He was experiencing the ultimate, crushing isolation, the very thing he had cruelly forced upon me when I was fighting for my life. I focused all my energy on my new business and my continued health. I even started a small support group for women who had been abandoned or abused by their partners during major medical crises. I called the group the Lionesses. We didn't just sit around and cry. We shared our stories, our legal resources, and our collective strength. One rainy evening, I decided to treat myself to a gallery opening downtown, something I never would have dared to do when I was with Julian, as he always mockingly said my taste in art was common and pedestrian. I was standing in front of a massive canvas, a painting of a dark storm breaking over a calm turquoise sea, when a man quietly approached me. "It looks like hope, doesn't it? The light hitting the water after the chaos," he asked softly. His name was Caleb, and I soon learned he was a dedicated pediatrician who spent his days helping sick children. We stood there and talked for hours, the gallery emptying out around us. He didn't care about my image, my social standing, or my vibe. He seemed to care deeply about my thoughts, my opinions, and my experiences. When I eventually felt safe enough to tell him about my battle with cancer and my messy divorce, he didn't pull away or look uncomfortable. Instead, he reached across the small cafe table we had migrated to and gently held my hand. "You're a warrior, Elena," he whispered, his eyes full of a sincere respect I hadn't felt in years. "I'm genuinely honored to know someone with your strength." It was the first time a man had looked at me and seen my inner power instead of my outward utility. I realized that my heart wasn't as permanently broken as I had once feared. 3 years after my initial stage 3 diagnosis, I had to go back to the hospital for my regular oncology checkup. As I walked through the familiar sterile halls, I realized I didn't feel the old, paralyzing fear or the cold dread. Instead, I felt a strange, quiet sense of pride. I walked past the infusion center and happened to see a woman sitting alone in a blue vinyl chair, looking absolutely terrified and small. I stopped in my tracks, went downstairs to the hospital gift shop, and bought the largest, most beautiful bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers I could find. I walked back up, entered the ward, and handed them to her with a smile. "I've been in that exact chair," I told her, my voice steady and kind. "I know it feels like the end, but you are so much stronger than you feel right now. Don't let the silence of others make you feel small. You are a fighter." She burst into tears and gripped my hand, thanking me over and over. I realized in that moment that my pain had been given a new, higher purpose. I wasn't just a survivor of a disease. I was a beacon of hope for others. I left the hospital that day with a light step, knowing that I had turned my darkest, most lonely moments into something that could illuminate the path for someone else. Julian tried to contact me one final time about 6 months later through a long, handwritten letter sent to my office. It was a rambling, desperate apology, filled with weak excuses and pathetic pleas for a small loan. He claimed he was dying from his heart condition and wanted to make peace with his soul before the end. I didn't even bother to read the entire thing. I had finally realized that making peace with a predator or a narcissist only gives them one more opportunity to sink their teeth into you. I took the letter home, walked over to my fireplace, and watched as the flames slowly licked the edges of the paper until it turned into fine gray ash. My peace didn't come from his hollow apology or his newfound clarity. It came from my own incredible resilience and the life I had built without him. I didn't need his words to validate what I had gone through. I had my truth, I had my health, and I had my absolute victory. I watched the last of the embers die out, feeling the very last bit of his toxic influence finally leave my life for good. Caleb and I decided to move in together a year after we met. Our new house was a place of light, filled with sprawling plants, stacks of books, and constant laughter. There were no ground rules about my health, no complaints about my energy, and no talk of image. A few months after moving in, I caught a particularly nasty strain of the flu that left me bedridden for a week. I prepared myself for the familiar isolation, but it never came. Caleb stayed up all night with me, bringing me hot soup, monitoring my fever, and placing cool cloths on my forehead. One night, I started to cry. Not because I was in pain, but because I was finally being cared for the way a human being deserves to be. "Why are you crying, honey?" he asked softly, tucking the blanket around me. "Because you're actually here." I sobbed. He kissed my forehead and held me close. "Where else would I ever be, Elena? We're a team, through the good and the bad." The word team didn't make me cower or cringe this time. It made me feel safe, anchored, and truly loved. I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for my entire adult life. A real partner who saw my worth. My business, which I officially named the Sterling Group, eventually became one of the most successful forensic accounting firms in the region. I specialized in helping women who were navigating difficult, high-asset divorces where financial abuse or hidden wealth was a factor. I became known in the legal community as the woman who could find a hidden dollar in a haystack of 1,000 offshore accounts. I used the skills I had honed during my darkest months to protect other women from the kind of systemic abandonment and theft I had suffered. Every single time I helped a client secure her financial future and reclaim her dignity, I felt like I was winning a little bit more of my own life back. I wasn't just Elena Vance, the architect's trophy wife, anymore. I was Elena Sterling, a woman of substance who knew the exact value of every cent and every human soul. My life was full, busy, and profoundly beautiful in a way I never thought possible when I was sitting in that blue chair. I still find myself thinking back to that 2:14 p.m. phone call quite often. It was undeniably the worst, most terrifying day of my life. But looking back with the perspective of time, it was also the day I began the slow process of finding my true self. If Julian had been a good husband, if he had been mediocrely supportive, I might have stayed trapped in that stifling one-sided marriage forever, playing the role of the supportive accessory until I withered away. His extreme cruelty and his total abandonment were the harsh catalysts for my radical growth. They forced me to dig deep and find a well of strength and resourcefulness I never would have known I possessed otherwise. I don't thank him for the pain he caused, but I thank the version of myself that decided to stop being a victim and start being a strategist. I am a woman who survived stage 3 breast cancer and a stage 4 betrayal. And because of that, there is absolutely nothing in this world that has the power to scare me now. On the 4th anniversary of my official remission, I took a solo trip to the coast. I stood at the very edge of the crashing waves and pulled the original, battered black leather ledger from my bag. It was worn, the edges were frayed, and the ink was faded, a physical relic of a war I had successfully won. I realized I didn't need to hold on to the physical evidence of my pain anymore. I walked out into the cold surf until the water was up to my waist, and I let the waves take the book. I watched as the pages fluttered in the wind and slowly dissolved in the salt spray. The Uber receipts, the hospital logs, the secret recordings, they were all returned to the sea. I let out a long, deep breath that I felt like I'd been holding in my lungs for years. I was no longer defined by what Julian had done to me or by the disease that had tried to take me. I was defined by the resilience I had shown and the life I had built for myself. I walked back to the warm sand where Caleb was waiting with a dry towel and a proud smile. My name is Elena Sterling. I am 36 years old, and I am a business owner, a partner, a loyal friend, and a survivor in every sense of the word. I have a surgical scar on my chest that reminds me of my battle and a fire in my soul that reminds me of my victory. If you are sitting in a blue vinyl chair today, feeling alone, abandoned, and forgotten by the people who were supposed to love you, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are the main character of your own story. The people who choose to leave you during your darkest, most vulnerable hour were never meant to be there to witness your dawn. Don't be quiet about your pain. Don't make yourself small to accommodate their comfort. Document your truth. Fight for your life with everything you have, and wait patiently for your moment of justice. Because when the medical winter finally ends, and it will end, you deserve to be the one standing tall in the warmth of the sun. I looked up at the bright, clear blue sky and smiled. I was ready for whatever chapter came next, and this time, I was dealing with it entirely on my own terms. Before you go, I want to hear from you. This story is about the strength we find when the person we trust most turns their back on us. Have you ever had to face a major crisis alone? Or perhaps you found the courage to say, "I can't deal with this right now," to someone who didn't deserve your time. Please, share your experience in the comments below. Let's turn this section into a space of strength for anyone still fighting their own battle. If Elena's story hit home for you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us tell more stories of resilience and justice. Thank you for watching, and remember, your value isn't defined by how others treat you, but by how you stand up for yourself.